Brad picks white flowers in his cozy garden, enjoying a calm morning. He prepares coffee for his beautiful wife, Lexi, who smiles as she says goodbye before heading to work. After she leaves, Brad continues his usual morning routine, reflecting on a dream that never came true. Once he wanted to be a musician, but fate had other plans, and now his days are filled with domestic life. The morning's idyll is abruptly shattered when the radio broadcasts horrifying news. Several districts of Los Angeles, from downtown to Beverly Hills, have been bombed. The explosive devices contain toxic chemicals that, according to the announcer, cause mutational viruses in people's bodies. Brad is overcome with anxiety for Lexi. He immediately picks up his phone to call her, but she doesn't answer. His worry grows as reports come in of people chaotically running through the streets and collapsing unconscious. A thick black smoke is swirling around the city. Brad realizes there's no time to waste. He hurriedly gets into his car and heads toward downtown to find his wife. However, a police checkpoint stops him on the way. Not wanting to lose precious time, Brad decides to take a detour, but on the uneven road, his tire gets punctured. Stopping near a hardware store, he goes in to get tools to fix the car. When he returns to his car, the radio delivers another alarming message. The ash from the explosions is extremely toxic. Everyone who comes into contact with it is infected. Authorities strongly urge residents to immediately quarantine themselves, sealing their homes to prevent the toxic air from entering. Brad realizes the situation is worse than he imagined. He goes back into the store to buy duct tape and other materials to seal his house. Despite the danger, Brad is determined to continue his search for Lexi. Soon he sees two police cars chasing a vehicle covered in gray ash. The driver stops, but the officers, keeping their distance, order him to stay in the car. The man attempts to flee, but gunshots ring out, and he collapses. Brad is stunned by what he sees. A police officer strongly advises him not to proceed toward downtown, where things are getting even worse. Understanding that he won't be able to go any further, Brad turns his car around. On the way back, he notices a boy sitting by the roadside. The boy, named Timmy, is staring thoughtfully at the thick smoke rising from the city center. Brad approaches him carefully and advises him to go home to his family immediately. When Brad returns home, he unexpectedly finds a stranger inside. It turns out to be Alvaro, a handyman from the neighborhood who, not knowing where else to go, sought shelter in Brad's house. Alvaro explains that the streets are becoming increasingly dangerous, and the toxic ash is moving toward their area. Brad continues trying to call Lexi, but her phone remains unreachable. Meanwhile, Alvaro turns on the radio and hears that the ash carried by the wind is now close. He suggests sealing the house from the inside by taping up all the windows and doors. However, Brad refuses, hoping that Lexi will return any moment. Another hour passes, and the sky becomes completely shrouded in smoke and ash. Brad realizes they can't wait any longer. Finally, he agrees with Alvaro, and together they start sealing every crack, using duct tape, plastic sheets, and even a shower curtain. Brad, still holding on to hope that Lexi will come back, places a bag with her belongings and a bottle of water by the back door. After some time, ash begins to fall from the sky, resembling snow. The news reports warn that the toxin in this ash is extremely dangerous, but its effects remain largely unknown. Alvaro finishes sealing the house, striving to make it as secure as possible, while Brad continues trying to reach his wife by phone. Lexi, meanwhile, is stuck in traffic on her way home. Her body is exhausted, she is injured, and a layer of toxic ash covers her clothing. At last, she struggles her way home and knocks on the door. Brad hears her voice, but seeing the ash on her body, he realizes he can't let her inside. Lexi yells at her husband, accusing him of abandoning her, especially when she notices a stranger behind him. Despite her anger, Brad remains calm. He asks her to go to the back door, where he has left clothes and water for her. He confesses his love for her but explains that he cannot let her in until the authorities provide clear instructions on handling those exposed. Reluctantly, Lexi agrees to his request and settles near the back door. Brad sits by the window, close to her, to offer his presence and support. However, when the radio announces that they must remain in quarantine for several days, Lexi breaks down. She has a hysterical fit, tearing apart the plastic barriers Brad had set up for safety. Brad, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, tries to calm her down, pleading with her to stop. Alvaro steps in to help, trying to convince Lexi that everything will improve and that the police and medical personnel will arrive by morning. Together they manage to calm her down gradually. In tears she asks Brad a rhetorical question: could he live without her if the worst were to happen? Meanwhile, Alvaro makes desperate attempts to reach his wife, but his calls go unanswered. Brad decides to disinfect himself, pouring bleach over his body to minimize the risk of contamination. In the morning, he looks out the window to see the entire world covered in a thick layer of ash. Despite the danger, Lexi survives, having found a way to make it through the night. Suddenly, the long-awaited siren sounds, signaling the arrival of the police. Lexi watches from a distance as officers brutally apprehend an infected person. Instead of providing the help she expected, the police act harshly and mercilessly. Staying out of sight, Lexi returns to the house. Realizing Lexi cannot remain outside, Brad takes a risk. He seals the bedroom doors to allow her to enter through the back door but sets up a plastic barrier for his own safety. Now they can see each other but cannot touch. During their conversation, Brad voices his belief that Lexi may already be infected and could die. These words terrify her and bring her to tears. Later, Lexi manages to contact her mother. She steps outside to talk and sees a young boy, Timmy, who has been left waiting for his parents since the explosions. Lexi brings him into the house so he won't be alone anymore. Meanwhile, the tension between Brad and Alvaro reaches a breaking point. They argue over a trivial matter, and in a fit of anger, Brad harshly tells Alvaro to stop taking his oxygen and leave the house. Later, realizing his mistake, he apologizes to his elderly neighbor. However, Alvaro, deeply upset, declares that he wants to return to his wife and leaves through the side door. Brad is forced to reseal the door once again. Later, Lexi decides to take a shower and Brad, ensuring safety, seals the door to allow her and Timmy to access the bathroom. During the night, Lexi notices strange movement in the yard and realizes someone is trying to break into the house. However, the intruder turns out to be their friend Rick. Clearly infected, Rick is coughing and looks emaciated. He shares news that there's a ship with medical supplies docked at the coast, and he has come to take Lexi so they can go there together. Rick believes that on the ship, they both have a chance of receiving help and salvation. Brad is firmly against Rick's idea of taking Lexi. He begs his wife not to trust Rick's promises, warning it could be a trap. However, Lexi, desperate and on the verge of death, declares she's willing to risk it for the chance to find medicine. Despite Brad's pleas, she decides to leave with Rick and Timmy. Some time later, soldiers led by Corporal Marshall knock on the door. They question Brad about the state of the house and ask if he's had contact with anyone infected. When they learn that Lexi tried to enter through a sealed window, they request samples of anything she might have touched. Confused, Brad complies. Without explaining their intentions, the soldiers take the samples and leave. Lexi returns to the house in a panic. She tells Brad that Rick and Timmy were arrested by the police, and she barely escaped. Brad tries to comfort her, but suddenly, Lexi starts coughing violently. Looking around, she notices dead birds everywhere. Later, the couple sits together, separated by the thin plastic barrier, trying to support each other with conversations. They dream about what they'll do if they survive. Their moment is interrupted by the sudden return of the soldiers. Marshall demands Lexi be taken out of the house. Brad tries to stop them, but the door slams shut in his face. Corporal Marshall explains that Lexi is being taken to a safe location, and that the house is no longer habitable. He reveals that when Lexi tried to enter through the window, some toxins leaked inside. Since the house had been sealed for so long, the humidity created an ideal environment for the virus to spray. The air inside is now extremely toxic, and Brad is likely a carrier. Marshall urges him not to resist to avoid worse consequences. The soldiers begin sealing the exits with plywood to prevent Brad from escaping. Then they drill a hole and start pumping in deadly gas. Brad begs them to stop, shouting that he's still alive. Summoning his last strength, he manages to break down the door and escape. However, outside, Brad immediately encounters a decontamination tent. Lexi sees him and starts screaming, but the soldiers restrain him, and Brad collapses unconscious. Lexi watches in horror, unable to calm down. Later, medics explain to her that the virus in the house had reached an uncontrollable stage, and there was nothing they could do. And with that, the film ends. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our other videos.